Turn back around. If you are ICE or the military, you still have time to turn back around. I am reading from Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland by Christopher R. Browning. Read it and weep. I'm going to set some boundaries real quick before we even get started, because this is my third time reading this, and I know that critical thinking is really hard, especially when we are scared. No Jewish person deserved what happened in the Holocaust, and the Holocaust happened. What is happening to Palestinians is not okay. Palestine deserves to be free. Jewish people deserve to be free. And Zionism should not be something that is believed even if people don't believe in Judaism. That's weird. It's weird if you believe that Jewish people deserve a homeland just so that way they get killed for you to be brought up to heaven. That's weird. Alright, now that we're on the same page, we are continuing from where we left off. After First Company had received instructions and departed for the woods, Trapp's adjutant, Hagen, presided over the selection of the work Jews. The head of a nearby sawmill had already approached Trapp with a list of 25 Jews who worked for him, and Trapp had permitted their release. Through an interpreter, Hagen now called for craftsmen and able-bodied male workers. There was unrest as some 300 workers were separated from their families. Does this sound familiar to you? Before they had been marched out of Josvav on foot, the first shots from the woods were heard. Quote, after the first salvos, a great unrest grew among these craftsmen, and some of the men threw themselves upon the ground weeping. It had to have become clear to them at this point that the families they had left behind were being shot. End quote. Lieutenant Buchmann and the Luxembourgers and First Company marched the workers a few kilometers to a country loading station on the rail line. Several train cars, including a passenger car, were waiting. The work Jews and their guards were then taken by train to Lublin, where Buchmann delivered them to a camp. According to Buchmann, he did not put them in a notorious concentration camp at Majdanek, but in another camp instead. The Jews were not expected, he said, but the camp administration was glad to take them. Buchmann and his men returned to Bilgoraj the same day. Meanwhile, First Sergeant Kamer had taken the initial contingent of shooters and First Company to a forest several kilometers from Josvav. The trucks halted on a dirt road that ran along the edge, at a point where a pathway led into the woods. The men climbed down from their trucks and waited. When the first truckload of 35 to 40 Jews arrived, an equal number of policemen came forward and face to face, paired off with their victims. If you don't want to end up like the men in this book, turn back around now. You still have time. You can still say, I've made a mistake. I chose the wrong path. This is the evil way, and I refuse to do this anymore. You will not be the only one, as you will hear. Led by Kamer, the policemen and Jews marched down the forest path. They turned off into the woods at a point indicated by Captain Wolof, who busied himself throughout the day selecting the execution sites. Kamer then ordered the Jews to lie down in a row. The policemen stepped up behind them, placed their bayonets on the backbone above the shoulder blades as earlier instructed, and on Kamer's orders, fired in unison. If you were not here for part 2, they learned right before how to do this. They had no idea that this was their task. In the meantime, more policemen of First Company had arrived at the edge of the forest to fill out a second firing squad. As the first firing squad marched out of the woods to the unloading point, the second group took their victims along the same path into the woods. Wolof chose a site a few yards farther on so that the next batch of victims would not see the corpses from the earlier execution. These Jews were being forced to lie face down in a row, and the shooting procedure was proceeded. Thereafter, the pendulum traffic of the two firing squads in and out of the woods continued throughout the day. Except for a midday break, the shooting proceeded without interruption until nightfall. At some point in the afternoon, someone organized a supply of alcohol for the shooters. I wonder why. By the end of the day of nearly continuous shooting, the men had completely lost track of how many Jews they had each killed. In the words of one policeman, it was in any case a great number. When Trapp first made his offer early in the morning, the real nature of the action had just been announced, and time to think and react had been very short. Only a dozen men had instinctively seized the moment to step out, turn in their rifles, and thus excuse themselves from the subsequent killing. Only a few. For many, the reality of what they were about to do, and particularly that they themselves might be chosen for the firing squad, had probably not sunk in. But when the men of First Company were summoned to the marketplace, instructed and giving a neck shot, and sent to the woods to kill Jews, some of them tried to make up for the opportunity they had missed earlier. You can too. One policeman approached First Sergeant Kammer, whom he knew well. He confessed that the task was repugnant to him and asked for a different assignment. Kammer obliged, assigning him a guard duty on the edge of the forest, where he remained throughout the day. Several other policemen who knew Kammer well were given guard duty along the truck route. After shooting for some time, another group of policemen approached Kammer and said they could not continue. He released them from the firing squad and reassigned them to accompanying the trucks. Two policemen made the mistake of approaching Captain and SS Hauptsturmführer Wolof instead of Kammer. They pleaded that they too were fathers with children and could not continue, because these men were killing mothers and children. They were sent back to the marketplace, accompanied by a non-commissioned officer who reported to Trapp. Trapp dismissed them from further duty and permitted them to return early to the barracks in Bilgarage. Some policemen who did not request to be released from the firing squads sought other ways to evade. Non-commissioned officers armed with submachine guns had to be assigned to give so-called mercy shots, because both from excitement as well as intentionally, individual policemen shot past their victims. Others had taken evasive action earlier. During the clearing operation, some men of First Company hid in the Catholic priest's garden until they grew afraid that their absence would be noticed. Returning to the marketplace, they jumped aboard a truck that was going to pick up Jews from a nearby village in order to have an excuse for their absence. These men were scared of the atrocities they were committing. They had not been raised with the same beliefs as a lot of the other people who were committing horrific acts. Sometimes people join the military because they have to, financially or otherwise. You can turn back around now. You have a right to the American people to say no. Others hung around the marketplace because they did not want to round up Jews during the search. Still others spent as much time as possible searching the houses so as not to be present at the marketplace, where they feared being assigned to a firing squad. A driver assigned to take Jews to the forest made only one trip before he asked to be relieved. Quote, presumably his nerves were not strong enough to drive more Jews to the shooting site, end quote. Commented the man who took over his truck and his duties of chauffeuring Jews to their death. After the men of First Company departed for the woods, Second Company was left to complete the roundup and load Jews onto the trucks. When the first salvo was heard from the woods, a terrible cry swept through the marketplace as the collected Jews realized their fate. Thereafter, however, a quiet composure indeed. In the woods of German witnesses, an unbelievable and astonishing composure settled over the Jews. If the victims were composed, the German officers grew increasingly agitated as it became clear that the pace of the executions was much too slow if they were to finish the job in one day. Comments were repeatedly made, such as, "It's not getting anywhere," and "It's not going fast enough," end quote. Trapp reached a decision and gave new orders. Third Company was called in from its outposts around the village to take over close guard of the marketplace. The men of Lieutenant Gnad's Second Company were informed that they too must now go to the woods and join the shooters. Sergeant Steinmetz of 3rd Platoon once again gave his men the opportunity to report if they did not feel up to it. No one took up the offer this time. You are becoming ordinary men, ordinary Nazis. It's becoming basic, normalized, and it's weak. You are weak because you gave in to your fear instead of cultivating hope.